Welcome to the Naked Bigfoot's channel. Let's start off tonight's discussion with the usual disclaimers. All views and opinions are the Naked Bigfoot's alone. He is not here to offend, although some may be offended. I am here to provide information, hopefully in an entertaining manner. If you are offended by bad language, this might not be the channel for you, or if you have small kids that you wish to watch my discussions and videos with, who are not used to bad language, you might not want them to have them in the room during the course of this, or send them out, or turn the volume down low enough just for you, or wear headphones, because I am known to cuss like a sailor. And with that, let's begin our discussion tonight. This is part 2 of my discussion on Voodoo. The legends versus the legends and myth exposed. The truth behind the legends and myth, I should say. Hell, I can't even remember what I write. In this video, I'm going to divide the time up in half. First half, I'm going to be talking about the day-to-day activities of a Houngan, which, if you remember from previous discussions, is a voodoo priest. And I'll talk about my experience as a Houngan. The second half, we'll be discussing the darker side to the faith, which centers mostly around the most unsavory of unsavory characters, the Bokor, which you might find very intriguing. Because when you hear voodoo and you see things in Hollywood concerning voodoo, or movies, or horror movies especially, they're mostly leaning towards the tales and legends that come out of communities about the Bokor, which is the darker side and the more scarier part to the faith. But let's begin with something a little bit more lighter about the Houngan in general. Okay, you may ask yourself, Mike, you're a Houngan. What does a Houngan do for the community? Well, our basic function is to service our. We're going to try to use terms that everybody can relate to that make sense. The proper term that we use in the faith are called the faithful and the believers. But a lot of people would think of it as a parish. For our weekly gatherings and our bi-monthly gatherings and our and so on and so forth, and our high rituals, the faithful, the parish, usually the faithful, we have about 31, I believe, that attend every ceremony, that attend every ritual, that attend every gathering, and about 10 or 15 others who come and go depending on if they're in town, or if they're in need of service, they'll come. So it's to put it in Southern church terms, it's a pretty small little town. I run a small little church, although it's not a church. But it would just so it makes sense to you, the listener, in terms that you can relate to. Besides doing rituals and the gathering of the ancestors and during the high holy spirit holidays and days. A Houngan administers to his people, to his parish. Now, a Houngan usually does not minister to anyone outside of the faithful. Say if a Baptist or a Catholic, a Jew, or a Muslim of any other faith, if they came to me seeking answers or seeking my ministrations, I usually refer them to someone else. We usually don't interact on a spiritual level with the people who are not part of the faith. Our community is insular. It's become that way over hundreds of years because in the past, when the faith was much larger and more prevalent in parts, especially here in the United States, in the South, and throughout the Caribbean. The bigger your following, the bigger your flock, the more attention that is brought upon you by those of other faith. And let's just say that most other faiths are not as open-minded as you may think, or accepting as you may think. They persecute in minor ways, and sometimes in overt ways as well, and covertly, as is human nature, to remove you from the community. One of the nice things about the faithful that I minister to, like I said, our following is small by most church standards, but it's big for this town that I live in, for this county that I live in here in Virginia. And I have my family has a good enough reputation to where, and I have a reputation for being eccentric in the first place. My whole family has a reputation for being eccentric in the first place, that we're not as much as accepted as tolerated. And I'll take that. I'll take tolerance over acceptance any day of the week. Because trust me, I tolerate a lot of people out there, outside the faith, and a lot of communities out there, and a lot of groups out there I tolerate. I may not accept them, but I do tolerate them. And I expect that in return. Now, what do I do for the faithful and for and for the following? Well, I bless homes. I bless pets. I'll go into homes and new homes especially, or homes that they feel that they think that the ancestors or something, or if something negative occurred in the household, they think has stained the spirit of the house. I will come in and cleanse that spirit and bless the house and make it habitable again. I bless pets, not everything is spiritual. I also minister on a doctor level as well. I provide herbal medications, and my faithful know that these medications and the things that I provide, it's not the same as going to a doctor. It's not the same as seeking medical advice if it's something serious. If somebody has a heart attack, I don't pretend to be a cardiovascular surgeon or expert. I will minister what I can to them, and then I'll refer them to a doctor as quickly as possible and insist that they go. I've been in several households in the past, and where things like that have happened, or people have had cancer, or people have had a heart attack, or broken bones and such, and they've asked me to come over to help them. And I will call the ancestors. I will ask for their hand. I will ask their Suli to aid in their healing and their recovery of both their body, their mind, and their spirit. But as soon as we're done with that, I make sure there's a rescue squad waiting right outside the house to take them to get proper attention. Um, so I do have and in modern voodoo practice, we have it's a blending of the spiritual and the practical, of the modern and the traditional, um, both being always rooted in the faith. Um, bless children, bless babies when they are born. I cannot begin to tell you how many times I've been in homes where people were they were and by the way, in the faith, um, 90% of births are done at home, surrounded by family, and with at least one, Houngan person in the room, if not in the room when the baby is born, but in the house as the baby is born, or a mambo if they feel more secure with a female mambo in the room when the baby is being born, so we can make sure that the baby is blessed by the Loa, and that the baby is comes into the world with a clean spirit, um, a fresh slate into the world. They're given the of the spirit world and of the blessings of their ancestors as well as the Loa. I actually participated in traditional births, and I really advise you to look up traditional West African births, because that's where the tradition comes from. Is it's a West African tradition, and there's a enter and I God, I need to take a picture of it. I wish I had it in the room with me right now. It's a wooden chair. It's called a birthing chair, where the woman sits in and gives birth in. And it looks always to me like the most uncomfortablest thing in the world, but it's a traditional medical tool that's used by many cultures and several faiths, including my own, for a traditional birth. And we're absolutely no painkillers are involved, either for you or for the woman that's giving birth. Trust me, I've wanted a few painkillers being in the room, something to dull the screaming in my head as I was watching it happen. Now, outside, and like I said, um, we provide, as a Houngan, provide charms as well as our blessings, advice, personal advice, always tempered by the wisdom of the ancestors. Um, Advice could be anything about love, finances, you name it, work. And people will come to me with questions about such and ask for my opinion and for me to minister them through it. Um, I can't begin. Nobody who is properly a member of the faith or the faithful would ever come to a Houngan and ask them for a curse or a voodoo doll or a love potion or something insane like that. Um, Usually, when I have people come to me, I know they're not part of the faith. Number one, and number two, they don't know what they're asking for. Um, and I just look at them and smile and go, "Sorry, I don't do that." Well, can you tell me where I can get something like that at? No, boo boo, I can't. I strongly advise you to work through this without dealing with trying to use the spirit world to do these things for you and to work outside of it. I'm not saying that a Houngan is not capable of creating a it's a fetish. That's what they're called. The dolls are called fetish dolls instead of voodoo dolls. That's one of the few times you'll hear me get my hackles in a up. That's when somebody refers to me as a witch doctor or a voodoo doll. Again, I'm very tolerant of most things, but I find those terms and the way they're used to be quite disparaging. And it's the only time that I stop being polite and I very calmly correct them, and then I remove myself from the situation. I'll get up and leave because at this point there's so much ignorance coming out of their mouth that I don't feel it's proper for me to sit there and take it anymore. I don't think anybody else in any other faith would sit back and take that as well. Sorry, had to get on my soapbox for 5 seconds there with that one. Okay. Not saying that we don't construct fetishes, because I've constructed many of a fetish. Um, and a fetish can be a doll, a puppet, a doll that's put together um, that is used as a representation of a person, an emotion, or a thing, or a loa that you wish to interact with um, on a spiritual level or a physical level. Now, not all fetishes, not all fetish are doll shaped. Some of them can be amulets, um, pieces of metal, necklaces, a bracelet, a medallion, um, earrings, nose rings. I've actually constructed a silver nose ring for somebody one time. Um, I was blessed with CB, which is why I never figured out why they want the blessings of Sibi, because Sibi is a Loa that is, if you're talking about shady Loas, it's about it. Sibi, Simbi is about as shady as they come. You got to be careful when it comes to Simbi's, with requesting from Simbi's wealth of knowledge, because Simbi gets great joy out of twisting your requests and twisting your wishes. You usually live to regret dealing with Simbi. um, but that's it. Is simple stuff in the community like that. Um, Now, I do have a bit of expertise in this outside of my faith um, with the supernatural and paranormal, especially when it comes to paranormal and supernatural critters that are out there, and cryptids that are out there as well. Um, but also being a Houngan, a priest, it makes you more sensitive to the spiritual world, to the spirits around me. So I've worked on occasion with paranormal investigators, with paranormal researchers, a number of them, in fact, that I call very good friends. I've also worked hand in hand um, with a number of covens here in the United States uh, to share knowledge and to partake if they have something they don't think they can solve, they'll contact me, and if I have the time or if I feel well, I can go out and meet them and work with them, especially with the paranormal investigators. There's a number of true psychic mediums that I work with on occasion. They'll ask me to come out with them, especially if they encounter something they can't quite explain. It's not like a lot of these psychic mediums and paranormal investigators that you see on YouTube and the Travel Channel, that if they can't explain what's going on, they automatically assume it's a demon. Well, a good paranormal investigator or a good psychic medium, if they don't know what it is, or if it's something that's aggressive, and they can't put a name to it, they seek people like me that are out there that can come in that perhaps can figure out what it is they're dealing with and give them advice on how to deal with them. and sometimes it's you can't deal with them and you just have to avoid them altogether. Um, and they'll ask me my advice. They'll ask me, is it safe? You know, whatever this presence is it a spiritual presence? Is it an inhuman presence? Is it an unhuman presence? Is it a once human presence? Those are the kind of questions that I get um, when I go out to help with investigations. I am by no means, I don't go out and do investigations on my own anymore. Like I said, I mostly do everything by invitation only if invited to come out or asked to come out to provide my input, or they'll send me a video, or they'll write to me and describe something to me and ask me what do I think it is, and how should they approach it or deal with it. And I have to admit, sometimes the situations I go into can be dangerous, especially if it's a paranormal or supernatural parasite or something that's unhuman or once human, that's violent and dangerous or predatory. Um, Usually, I'm surrounded enough by my faith and as a Houngan that that I can protect myself and I can push them away and I can help the people that are dealing with it deal with them. But that's outside my faith. Again, I will use my faith when asked to come into these situations. Uh, um, to help aid me in dealing with them. And most of the time, I define what it is that we're dealing with at the time. Instead of people screaming and having their head on fire, screaming, "Oh my God, it's a demon!" screaming to the top of their lungs, um, when it could be something as simple as an oak spirit um, that still dwells within the wood that the house was built from, an elemental spirit that feels like it's been slighted. And you can't get rid of things like that because they're bonded to the wood of the house that it was built from. Instead, you have to appease it and calm it down and try not to piss it off in the future. And if you do, you just have to, again, calm it down and apologize for whatever it is you're doing and hope they accept your apology. Um, yeah, I've dealt with elementals, like especially when you live in places, especially here in the South, when you have homes that are that predate the Civil War. They were built of materials from the local mountains and woods and places. They have their own spirit that inhabit them, and the spirit does not go away just because you cut the tree down. It becomes part of the structure that it's built into, or the stone to help build the foundation. It becomes part of the structure that you build it on. And people mistake these unhuman um, spirits as ghosts or have gods, or demons or dark energy, when in fact they are about as neutral as they come. But they can be pissy, um, mischievous. A lot of them can be happy little critters. Um, but they're often, again, misidentified, usually for the purpose of sensationalism, to get more likes or more clicks on their video, or more likes on YouTube or their posts, or more views on the travel channel. Notice that I'm very carefully avoiding naming names. I have a long list of people that do shit like this, both professionally, that are well known, and people who want to be well known on YouTube and social media. And that either will just completely make up something about a place being haunted by demons or dark spirits. They'll either make it up or they'll misidentify what it is, and end up causing more damage than good in the situation. Sorry, I went off on a bit of a tangent right there. let me wrap up my talk about Houngan with this, and it'll lead into my discussion about the Bokor. Think of a Houngan as a doctor, and what's in the Hippocratic Oath. In the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm. We do not do harm to anybody. We try to keep our emotions and our emotional state out of it. The only emotions and altered states are the ones that the ancestors and the Loa put us in, or are brought in to influence us in. We don't inject ourselves into it. We are, like I said, we're just the channel. We're just the vessel for them to act through, with no agenda whatsoever, except for to do good by the person or people that are around us, both the faithful and the non-faithful alike. We want to do good for them at all times. And I really debated on sharing this little bit of information. I figured people might find it interesting. My teacher, who taught me to be a Houngan, who brought me into the faith, his name was, always will be. His name was Papa Thomas. I miss that man. I miss him so much. On occasion, he'll walk into a ceremony. His spirit will, and he'll sit down during the ceremony and smile, which he's letting me know that he's proud of me. I miss Papa Thomas a great deal, but like I said, he comes back and visits me. He's put good words in for me with the ancestors and Loa, and he still vouches for me in the next life. Again, I miss the man. I miss him so much, but again, he's always with me in one form or another. He taught me a ritual that not all Houngan do, but a lot of them do. It's where the Houngan goes and makes a bargain with the Loa. And we're not talking about the children of the Loa, the lesser Loa, the nameless Loa. We're talking about the big guys. We're talking about Loa, Baron Samadi, Simbi, Ogun, Dambala, the big guys. Esuli Red Eye, all the big guys. That you can enter into a bargain with them to where you give up a bit of yourself physically and mentally and emotionally and spiritually. You give a part of your body away. You give part of your autonomy away to them. And in return, you get something that you bargain, that's part of the bargain that you make the deal for. Let me be a little bit more specific. Papa Thomas guided me through the ritual to the bargaining that I did. I asked 3 Loa. I asked Legba. I asked Esuli, not Esuli Red Eye, Esuli, and Baron Samadi. I requested that the 3 would dwell within me. And in return, I would give them everything to the left of me. Well, what does that mean, you may ask? Really quick, I've talked about this before. The spiritual world, the spiritual world that exists around us, within us at all times. Lacks any kind of physicality. The Loa create the sensations of the mortal and physical world. Tasting something, eating something, seeing something, tasting something, touching it, smelling it. Um, they lack the ability to experience those things because they don't have those senses here. Their senses work in a different way on a spiritual level, not on a physical, mortal level. And when I made the bargain with them, I gave them the left half of my body. That was my eye, the left half of my nose, my mouth, my heart, and organs going down the left side of your body. That includes your hand, as well as your hands and your feet, and your ear. That they can experience this world around me anytime they want to. They will dwell within me at all times and experience all these things at all times. And in return, I requested only one thing. And it usually has to be one word that you can ask for. One thing, and you have to sum it up in one word when you make the bargain. Um, I sought knowledge. So when the three Loa asked, "What do I want in return?" I told them knowledge. They accepted it, the bargain. Let me tell you how that bargain works now. On their side, I will feel impulses to reach out and touch things that I never would normally do, like a rose bush. I would feel the impulse I would normally not smell because I know what the rose smells like. But something in me is telling me to smell the rose and to bend over and smell it and see it and to touch the thorns on it, to feel the pricking of the thorns into my finger. And I know that's the Loa wishing to experience these sensations. Or if I go into a restaurant or, an open air marketplace that sells food, um, I'll get the impulse to go try things that I normally would not eat or like to eat or think about eating. And I know it's them wishing to experience that taste, that flavor, that texture of that food, or have the urge to listen to music that I would normally not listen to, or read something I would normally not read. Um, but I know that's them experiencing the world through me, through this half of my body. Um, in return, knowledge. Now we're talking about, I just can't close my eyes and go, I want to know about blah, blah, bitty, blah, blah. No, doesn't work like that. They don't give direct answers. But you do get flashes of insight that guide you to the correct answers. Whether it be another person who has the answer or a book, um, you name it. They give you that kind of intuition to go forth and to find it. You know when you're getting closer to it. I always tell people it's like a voodoo spider sense. It starts tingling when I'm getting closer to the answer that I'm seeking. Um, and then when I find the answer, I know it's the truth. And it is the correct answer. And that's come in really handy when I'm asked out on paranormal investigations, or I'm asked to use my consultation services to help them figure out a problem or figure out a spiritual critter or anything out there. That 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 path of knowledge comes in quite handy and quite useful at the time. But again, I give up a certain amount of autonomy, a certain amount of overt freedom, and in return, I get the answers that I seek. And it takes time. It doesn't happen like instantaneously. It takes time. But I've never had, when I was seeking an answer, seeking a bit of knowledge, um, it's never taking usually no more than a week for me to find the answers, or for the answers to find me. I know that's a little bit vague and odd, but that's how it works. Okay, now let's talk about something that's a little bit unsavory, which a lot of people find fascinating, are drawn to it because it's we're always drawn to something that's scary or mysterious or that could potentially hurt us. We're always sticking. We see the flame and we don't know the fire is hot until we put our hand in it and find out what hot really feels like. Well, it's the same when you're finding out what a Bokor is. A Bokor is a person. It's usually a man. I've never met a female Bokor. I've never heard of one. I'm sure there's some that probably nowadays in the non-traditional parts of the faith where there's a female Bokor out there. Um, Real quick, in our faith, there is the serpent, the great serpent, the white serpent, that sometimes is an aspect of Damballa, who's a Loa, a big time Loa, who is the great serpent that is the spine, the nucleus, the nexus of our faith, that all the Loa and ancestors dwell about. The sun is always shining upon the serpent's back. The light that reflects from the scales of the great serpent creates the rainbow, and that is the good. That is the light. That Houngan walked within that light that radiates from the reflection of the off the scales of the great white serpent. But there's also the shadow that is cast by the serpent on the ground. And inside of that shadow walks the Bokor. A Bokor originally, back in the infancy of our faith, when the Loa were beginning to bring wisdom to the faithful and to the people, the Bokor was looked at as a sorcerer, that he could either be very, very good and beneficial to a community, or he could be very destructive to a community. But over the centuries and over time, the Bokor became less and less helpful and more destructive. Much like Damballa, the great serpent, the great white serpent, the Loa also cast a shadow. Baron Samedi, especially, and Simbi especially, when they stride upon the serpent's back, they cast a shadow. The light that is on Samadi's face, the light that is on Simbi's face, is the good and positive aspect of that Loa. The shadow that is cast by the Loa from the sun is the darker, negative aspect of them. I'll take Baron Samedi, for example. He, of course, a lot of people know he's the tall, gaunt man who wears the top hat and paints his face with a white skull and always carries a shovel or rides a black or white gaunt horse and smokes cigars. That's how he usually appears. He, of course, governs over death. He judges all the deaths in the world, and you do not die properly until he digs your grave for you. but he can help ease the transition between life and death. That is the positive aspect of Samadhi. He can actually bless weddings. Samadhi can, where the death of your old life being reborn into a new life, a new family. Samadhi is somebody you would ask to do that for you with. But the shadow that is cast by Samadhi, the darker side of him, that's when things like curses, zombies, which by the way are real. Zombies are real, but they're not what you think they are. Um, they're not like The Walking Dead or anything like that. I might just have to do a show on voodoo zombies. Might have to do a discussion on voodoo zombies probably soon to explain how that works. You might find that fascinating. Some of it you might already know, but a lot of it you may not know. But I think it would be a fascinating topic of discussion to have. Or Simbi, who is Simbi is the when somebody asks for a charm or somebody asks for some type of rite or spell, or they would go to somebody who had access to Simbi. But if you wanted to curse someone, you would go to somebody who could access the darker, shadowy part of Simbi. Or wish death upon someone, you would go to the darker, shadowy side of Samadhi. That's where the Bokor comes into play. The Bokor is a sorcerer. Is bad guy. Overall, he only deals with the shadow that's cast by the serpent and the shadow that's cast by all the Loa. He deals in curses. He deals in harmful fetish. Gets much. When people hear about ritual sacrifices of people, are usually done by a Bokor. To appease the bloodlust of the shadowier sides of the serpent, or the shadowy sides of the Loa in question. They know that they are, when they do pass from this earthly plane, that they will not. As soon as a Bokor decides to somebody becomes a Bokor, or decides to deal with the darker sides of the faith, they automatically start to live what we call, sadly, we call living a half-life. They are both alive and dead at the same time. Their body's alive, but their spirit and their soul has died. So the only thing that's left in the place of that dead soul is pain and bitterness and anger and malice, and they act out on the world appropriately. You would never go to a Bokor and ask them to help with your marriage, but you would go to a Bokor to ask for your enemy to die. You would go to, say, let's use the stuff that, if anybody knows the history of Haiti, with Papa Doc Duvalier and his cronies back, Duvalier and his cronies back in the day that ran there. Duvalier was famous for having numerous Bokors on his payroll that he used that they would go out, any of the political enemies of Duvalier would go out and zombify his enemies, or curse his enemies, or kill his enemies outright, sacrifice his enemies outright, all for the greater glory of Duvalier. The Bokor are opportunistic. Um, when they don't deal um, well with the lesser Loa whatsoever, the children of the greater Loa whatsoever. Usually they derive all the spiritual power that they have from these spirits of the dead, of humans, of people that have passed. Um, all their power gained through the trapping and then channeling of a human soul or a spirit or essence. And if you ever, and I will have to tell you a quick story in a moment about the time I actually visited the dwelling of a Bokor in Mississippi. I'll never forget it. A person who goes and asks um, for a Bokor's assistance, with dealing with their enemies or cursing someone or wishing harm upon someone else, that person is automatically is condemned themselves. Because when they do, their spirit will leave their body, and their spirit is then captured and kept by the Bokor to be able to use. The more spirits, the more lives, the more once lives that a Bokor collects, the stronger, in a spiritual sense, they become. Um, they contain these spirits within different types of fetish. They could be a doll. They could confine a soul to a doll. They can find someone's essence to a mason jar um, or a clay jar. They can confine their essence to a candle, you name it. And then they have a sacred place that they do all their castings from and all their worship at, much like a Houngan has, except for this is a much bloodier place. Um, is usually lined with the fetish they create. Um, oh, and they'll also do it to stones and gemstones, semi-precious stones and gemstones, which they'll work into jewelry in which they wear on their body, their hands, or their necks, necklaces and stuff. They'll contain a human spirit within them that they've confined there. Um, and again, these spirits, think of each one as a mini nuclear reactor. They provide tons of spiritual energy when they're reaching out to do their workings with in the spiritual world. So the more they collect, the stronger they become. I know that sounds weird, but it's true. Um, the Bokor never deals with life; they always deal with death and intimately with death. Um, it's foul. They always have a scent. We call it a spiritual scent about them that somebody who's spiritually aware can always smell. It smells like a corpse, old, decaying, ancient corpse. When you walk by one, you can usually smell a Bokor. On a spiritual level, you can smell it about them. Or if somebody has any kind of spiritual awareness, they can sense that and smell that. And I've been told, and I've experienced it, that it is incredibly unpleasant. Like I said, they are known for making zombies. They're known for cursing people. They're known for um, blood rites, where they'll sacrifice children, they'll sacrifice adults. And when the bodies are sacrificed, but the spirit of the child or the spirit of the baby or the spirit of the adult um, is then not allowed to move on into the world of the ancestors. It's confined in the world of the mortal coil. It's not allowed to move on. It's trapped within a fetish that the Bokor constructs and prepares the vessel before the sacrifice begins. Uh, Animals are very rarely sacrificed by them. There is no power to be gained from confining the spirit of an animal, um, of a creature that's not allowed to think, that's not allowed to feel. Uh, it's more of an abomination to get the soul of a human. Um, and usually these souls are, when they're in these fetish, they're driven mad because of what they're being used to power. They realize it, but there's nothing they can do about it. Um, the Bokor always seeks power. Um, politically, they will go forth and hell, they'll join school boards. They'll go out and they'll become mayors. Uh, one in particular that I know off the top of my head was actually a pediatrician. He was an interesting character. He was a pediatrician. And the small Haitian community that lived near him that lived near him knew what he was. And they didn't have a Houngan that had balls enough to try to drive him out of the community. So he's been a plague on that community. Hopefully he's dead and moved on to someplace terrible. I've never gone back to figure out whether he was around or not. But I hope he's not. I hope he's dead. And he's someplace in a jelly like hell burning right now. Usually, Bokor loves selling trinkets, I've discovered. Usually, when you go into legitimate, I'm saying that in quotation marks, and I'll have to explain that in another discussion. Legitimate voodoo wear shops, places where you can get implements and tools to perform your rites and your when you're the Loa, or if you're Houngan. Usually Houngan, we make our own tools. We grow our own herbs. We grow enough and make enough that we're able to share with the faithful. Either sometimes they're sold, sometimes most of the time they're not. Uh, or like I said, I'm good friends with a number of covens, and I raise a lot of rare and interesting herbs that I use in my faith. They also use in their faith as well. And we will set up. We'll exchange them. We'll trade. They have something I want. They want that. We'll trade. We usually don't exchange money. It's usually a trade or a gift that we do back and forth. Um, we non-mainstream faiths have to look after each other. um, every horrible thing that you see in Hollywood, where people are being tortured in their dreams by voodoo priests, or they're having their bodies ripped apart by someone using a voodoo doll. God, I hate that term. A fetish doll. Or somebody wanting to cast a love charm or to harm a spouse who's an unfaithful spouse. It's usually something. It's usually based on something that people found out that a Bokor has done. Um, like I said, that pediatrician that I was talking about, usually a Bokor does not live um, a long life. The oldest one that I personally know of has been about 60 years old. They usually meet a very unfortunate fate because it's in our faith. It's in our faith and our belief system. You do indeed reap what you sow. All the evil you put in the world will eventually take you out of the world. But the thing is, when a Bokor dies, there is no forest to walk with the ancestors. There's no great house to live in with the ancestors. When they go into the next world, they're buried in they're confined in the spiritual equivalent of a cemetery, um, where their spirit is buried underground for eternity. Um, they know no rest. They're always awake, trying to fight their way out and dig their way out of the grave, and they never can. they're perpetually buried in the next life, because of the things that they did in this life and the things they've done to the world of the living. Trust me, there's a lot of people that have passed on that they have a few scores to settle with a number of Bokor, and they would be waiting for them in the next life. So it's best that they would be punished by being buried for all eternity in a cemetery. And it's usually they're buried by Baron Samedi. He welcomes them at the door to the forest and begins to guide them down the trail to the forest, and then he veers off the trail and they're in a cemetery and with an open grave. And he pushes them into, and then he buries them. And there their spirit will stay for all eternity, screaming and digging at the grave, never allowed to come out. I think it's just. And I'll conclude this by telling you guys something very interesting. Like I said, they deal with the blood and death. You can usually find mummified fingers and body parts at the dwellings of a Houngan. Dwellings of a Bokor. When I was in Mississippi, and I actually went out to visit the Bokor in that community just to get a feel for him, because I had never encountered one up to that point. I'd never gone out in one, and I was always told that I should, the more experiences that I have, and the better and more well-rounded that I would be, and more helpful that I would be to my people. I would know the evil as well as the good and be able to recognize the two. When I came to their home and I walked in, I knew immediately that it was the home of a Bokor, because I could hear and not hear, hundreds and hundreds of voices, men, women, children, all ages, whispering. But it wasn't, they were just sounds, they were whispering, without saying words, voices without words. And they were all around me when I walked in. And they floored me. It literally put me on my knees as soon as I walked in. I could feel all these spirits whispering at the same time. All these souls that this bastard had trapped over his lifetime as a Bokor. And he had them in his space. As a Houngan, it would have been my... I would have had to have, if he took me to his space, it would have been my duty to go and free all those souls that were down there, which usually probably would have ended with him killing me to keep me from doing it. But instead, I sat down and had tea with the bastard over we had a very tense and interesting discussion. He was older than me, and I was just a fledgling Houngan. And I have to admit, he did try to tempt me by showing me all the benefits he'd got from dealing with the dead all these years, all the material things that he had gained in this world, as well as the spiritual power that he had amassed over the decades. And for a very, very brief moment, I was tempted. I was tempted. And I was able to gather myself up and leave and never look back and never be tempted anymore by it. It's an anathema to me to even think of it now. So it actually disgusts me. It makes me sick to my stomach to think that I was tempted even for the briefest period during that. Well, guys, it looks like it's that magic time. It's time to wrap this up. Again, I hope for those who are watching this, I hope you enjoyed the discussion. You probably have more questions than answers now, but feel free to leave comments, ask me questions. I'm more than welcome to answer them. I will answer them. I will talk to you. I will answer as many questions as I'm humanly capable of answering within my knowledge sphere. I appreciate you. You can like or dislike this video. I invite you to do both. It's your, if you didn't like it, then tell me what you didn't like it. Tell me what you didn't like about it, and see if I can do better for you in the future. But I'd appreciate a follow back on Twitter as well. My handle is VoodooMan3 on Twitter, or you can look up Mike the Naked Bigfoot on Twitter and find me. If you feel inclined, you can subscribe to this channel. I promise you there'll be more videos in the future on many, many other topics. Thanks for joining. Thanks for tuning in. I look forward to talking with you again about more interesting things. Have an awesome night, everyone. And I'll see you all soon.